Hey everybody, Tal back with you. We're continuing our series in the life of games of Mikhail Tal. This is from, continue to look at his younger years. This is a game from a student tournament. He was white here against Tal-Kolarov. Tal was white here. E4, of course, that was the move with which he was most prominently connected throughout his career. It was the most aggressive move. I think the worm has sort of turned on that, especially given the evidence from this currently running World Championship match. It's hardest to get aggressive chances from this move now, but in the 50s, this was by far the most aggressive move. It fit perfectly with Tal. His opponent certainly helps the cause by playing the Sicilian, and then helps along even further with the Sicilian Najdorf. So even today, the Sicilian Najdorf is considered the most aggressive and tactical and concrete opening, I think, in the entire opening catalog. Maybe the Sicilian Dragon is a little bit more, but even back in the 50s, this was the opening you played if you wanted an aggressive tactical game. It hasn't changed all that much. Bishop g5. This was the only serious answer against the Najdorf in those days. You didn't see a whole lot of variety. It's hard to find statistics from those days in terms of a pie chart showing, but I would guess Bishop g5 was played in at least 60% of encounters versus the Sicilian Najdorf. Nowadays, there's a greater variety. f4 was another popular move in those days. It's really lost its shine. Black has found a lot of equalizing measures against this way of playing, and white really hasn't tried to repair it. h3 is hot theory nowadays. Back in the 60s and 70s, this was sort of a barely known sideline. If you saw it in like an ECO or an MCO, the only note you'd see on it would be from a Fischer game back in 1968, I believe. Now this is considered hot theory. The point is, white's preparing g4 in the same way that white would prepare g4 with, say, the English attack with f3. But he's preparing it with his h-pawn, so that leaves complete flexibility with his f-pawn. It leaves complete flexibility with his dark square bishop, in fact, with all of his pieces. So in certain ways, this is an optimal move because it's incredibly flexible. Now, of course, it commits white's h-pawn, so if white ever wanted to continue the kingside march, he would ultimately lose a move, moving the h-pawn again. But it does have a lot of virtues to it, and white is actually getting some interesting positions out of the opening nowadays with this piece of theory. So the ebbs and flows of theory are quite fascinating. Chess is certainly not dead. Knight bd7. This is another good example of how theory is most certainly not dead. When I was coming up in chess in the 90s, this move, if you saw anything about it in an opening manual, the only note you saw was for a Spassky-Petrosian game from their 1969 match, where Spassky completely demolished Petrosian. And it seemed like theoreticians at the time more or less agreed that it was because of the opening. And then e6 was the only line that black ever played. Nothing of the sort. Knight bd7 is perfectly fine, and now modern theory has sort of taken up the torch on this move and reinvigorated it with some great ideas. Now that this is absolutely the trendy way, and it's the way black wants to play if he wants any genuine winning chances. Because theory on playing e6 has gotten out so far and so well analyzed that if you're looking to get a win with black, or at least get a genuine game on the board, it's pretty hard. Whereas Knight bd7, very fresh, very interesting. It's easier to get a genuine game of chess on the board. Bishop c4, this is the second most popular move. f4 is the most played. Not the best in my opinion. And this is just sort of a continuing to play by analog, because it's how you play in the bishop g5, e6 line. But black actually gets quite good play here. g5. This is a very common Najdorf idea. If you play the Najdorf, and I used to play the Najdorf exclusively, this is a positional idea that you have to have written into your chess marrow. This is often a pawn sacrifice, but here black is gaining the e5 square for his knight, and that's going to be more or less an eternal outpost for his activity. g4. And this is a modern main line of handling this position. Black scores incredibly well from here, and black is down a pawn, but he's got this active rook in the h-file. He can sometimes gain back the h-pawn. Usually black's not going to even care about the h-pawn. E5 square, completely owned. Both these knights can take advantage of it. This bishop on g7 is incredibly strong. This is probably even, but practically, I think any strong player would vastly prefer black, just for the activity. So bishop c4 actually gives white a better chance of an active game. Queen a5, this is a popular move, but the engine hates it. There are certain opening positions that the engine consistently overestimates the chances. Like if you try to examine a King's Indian with a computer, it'll absolutely hate black's position every time. So it's hard to draw conclusions on a King's Indian from just pure engine analysis. Here, this is the sort of wide-open tactical opening where I would really listen to the engine's evaluation. Queen b6. This is the main line. In my opinion, it's the best. It immediately puts pressure on this b2 pawn. One way that this can go, bishop b3, so black gets the concession of forcing this bishop to move again, and then e6. It's safe to play e6 here once the queen is off d8, because on a bishop x e6, f takes e6, knight takes e6 sacrifice, the queen isn't on d8 to be hit. Queen d2. And this position's been seen a lot. This is a sharp and perfectly balanced position, and there's going to be a fun game to come. If you play the Sicilian, this is exactly the sort of position you want as black, or white for that matter. Queen a5, a little bit risky. Castle. And the difference in the previous note is that white hasn't been forced to play bishop b3. So white has put that tempo to good use, just directly mobilizing queen d2 and castles. So white has a very dangerous position here. Bishop x e6. This is just a flat-out error. And this is where you get more talk about the Tal wamboozling and the Tal mystique. Nothing could be further from the truth. So first off, this is a sharp move, and it's very difficult to defend against this move, even when you know what's coming. It's always easier to attack than defend. That's a basic principle that aggressive chess players have taken advantage of for time immemorial. It's the rare chess player that actually enjoys the task of defending. You can think of Petrosian, you can think of Korchnoi, but there's not too many names that actually enjoy being hunkered down and forced to play passive or even active counterattacking chess. And that's not exclusive to Tal. Tal played aggressive chess, but he was sort of the next generation of attacking chess. He just kept going after his opponents with these deeper attacking moves. They just weren't one-trick ponies. And the engine analysis phenomenon we've seen a lot with the World Championship match. When you sit down with an engine and look at this move, it just immediately spits back like negative 2.5. So if you're a weaker player just sitting down with your engine, you might just scoff, oh, it's obviously losing because the engine just tells you these 5 moves. Well, I hate to tell you, but when you're playing over the board, you don't have an engine telling you what to play. When you have this played over the board against you, it hits you like a cold wave of water to the face, and then you have to overcome that emotional shock and figure out a way to defend. And that is difficult even against the weakest of attacking motions. Here, this is a normal Sicilian sacrifice, and white is getting good compensation for it. The fact that there's a way through the jungle to get an advantage, objectively, yeah, it leads to an advantage, but it's difficult to find this. So f takes, king f7, and just immediately going wrong. And this is one of the most natural-looking moves in the position. Knight e5 is best. This is, and you can take a general principle from this. Black is looking to defend actively. So knight e5 gets this natural outpost for the knight and attacks this knight on e6 with tempo. So the knight's aiming for c4, where black is looking to generate his own counterplay. If you want to take something general from this, look to defend actively, look to counterattack, get your own chances. In any position, if you defend passively, almost always that makes your position worse, just because it allows your opponent to to rear up and hit with full force instead of having to worry about defense at the same time. So knight xf8. If white chooses to take the important in-between move here, bishop takes e6. And that eliminates that dangerous knight on e6. This is one potential way the line can go. And here, the bishop is stronger than the 3 pawns. White only has 1 passed pawn. They aren't a unified mass moving together, so that makes it easier to defend against the pawns. I would definitely prefer the bishop here. Knight xf8 is the main move. Knight c4. This in-between move might be what Kolarov missed and why he preferred king f7. If the rook takes, this is worse. And then knight a4. This is a very clever defensive idea. Basically, white's up enough material that he can toss some of that material back so he can defend. Bishop takes, still defending b2. And then the queen gets back in time. And here, white has rook and 3 pawns for the 2 pieces. That's more than enough. But knight c4 defends everything in time, and also planning black's own active play. And this is still a dangerous position. I mean, again, once you get rid of the engine analysis disease, if you're just looking at this position over the board, it's still very complex. But this is better for black for sure. But black goes wrong immediately, and that's so often the case in these defensive positions, because it is so hard to defend. Queen d6. This is obvious, but it's not the best move. This allows black another shot at active counterplay. A3, it's a hard move to make, because it's so hard to psychologically force yourself to make these small timeout moves. The player that most comes to mind when you see a timeout move like this, at least to me, is Garry Kasparov. He was the master of wielding up these incredibly powerful attacks, and then all of a sudden, the little sting in those attacks would be those little timeout moves, that little extra tempo that he would take to just completely solidify his position, and often to make his opponent, force his opponent to make a move, which would ultimately weaken his position. But here, a3 cuts out any counterplay for black, and it gives white the opportunity to just play for free. This could be one way a game would go. Because here, white has prevented b4, black doesn't have the sort of counterplay against the queen side he would really like. This is about balanced. I would subjectively prefer white. White's got the 3 pawns. There's still plenty of material on the board, so that makes any attacking push much easier. But objectively, this is probably balanced. Black can eventually go for his own queenside play, and the piece is going to be fairly strong in this position. So, queen x d6 allows b4, and that allows black back into a much better position. Queen x a2, and this is the sort of counterplay you want when you're defending. You don't want to passively defend. You want to actively defend. King g8. This is not the most incisive. When you're defending, the main technique that you should embrace, trading off the attacking pieces. Here, the knight on d5 is incredibly strong, so it makes a whole lot of sense to just trade that attacking piece off. And then the king can drop back to g8. And here, black's job is so much easier because that knight is missing. This is definitely a much better game for black, if not winning, just because the king is safe. That strong knight on d5 is gone. He can breathe a lot easier. King g8 leaves a lot of tension in the position. Bishop takes. That's the minor piece we want to trade off. That knight on d5 is a lot more important than bishop on g5. And then gxf6. This immediately swings the position back to being completely lost. Suddenly, the black king is completely vulnerable. There's nowhere for the black king to go anymore. Knight xf6. King f7. This might be the move that Kolarov missed, and this keeps black in the game. King h8, of course, would meet with knight g6. But king f7 steps up in pocket. There's no more checks left for white. Knight e8, hitting the queen. Queen a1, again, play actively. And again, this is an incredibly complex position. So odds are Tal would just outplay this person from this position anyways. That said, I would say black would be better here. Black's got... it's 2 pieces versus a rook and a pawn, but black has this passed a pawn. Plus, white's king is actually fairly exposed as well, so white doesn't just have one-way play against the black king. Black's got all this counterplay, plus those other trumps with the passed a pawn and the 2 pieces. But gxf6, that just completely opens up the black king to bombardment. Rook d3, this is the wrong rook. Rook e3 is just a very simple win. If the queen checks, knight b6, and then the knight is holding the position together. The knight guards this rook on f8. The rook on f8 is helping guard the f6 pawn. So once that knight is gone, black's entire position collapses. But if knight e5, king e2, and white just crashes through. No, this is a decisive exposure. But rook d3 allows black some chances, so queen a1 just misses those chances. Knight e5 holds on, just barely. Bishop g4 just barely hangs on in this position. Queen b4 has to be played. If knight takes, king d4, the king can't go back because that would have been the queen. And this is an insane position, but it's probably going to end in perpetual check. Queen b4 prevents all of this. And this is slightly favorable for white, so black is up a piece, but white has 3 pawns through the piece. White has a passed c pawn, and white has a very strong knight in d5, and black has this weak f pawn. To me, that sort of swings the balance towards favoring the 3 pawns versus the piece. But it's, again, it's still a very complex position. So the difference between rook d3 and rook e3, rook d3 is getting hit by knight e5. So knight e5 actually wins a tempo, and that stops white from playing knight xf6. Whereas on rook e3, knight e5 just gets hit with knight xf6. So this simple tactical detail is what swings the balance of rook d3 versus rook e3. But queen a1 just gives up the ghost. And f4, and suddenly this stops knight e5. Also, suddenly this black queen is very much trapped. So white is going to balance his threats of a decisive main attack along with random tactical threats of trapping the black queen. b3, and this is more or less Tal in cleanup mode. The game is more or less over. So, if the black queen steps out of this battery, just a rook lift over, and then black is just crushed. There's no good place to move this rook. Knight's just going to come to c6 wherever this rook moves. But rook a7 was played, knight e6 checks. So, if takes, we just take the queen. So king g7, and e5. The material balance is 2 pieces against a rook and 2 pawns, but here white is just crashing through to the black king. There's no way to keep the black king well defended at all. This game is more or less over. Black goes into desperation mode with knight x e5. Of course, if fe, rook d7, and suddenly black is eliminated. But just queen c5. Take. King c1. There's no more checks for black, and black resigned here. Black is just down a rook. So, typical crazy Tal game. Really, the key to this game, all the way back here, this really set the tone for the entire game. Don't let the evaluation that pops up on your engine screen fool you. This is a very dangerous and concrete move. This is the sort of move that you'd want to be prepared for if you face it over the board, because it's so hard to find a lot of these defensive moves, because some of them are counterintuitive, some of them are very complex, some of them still lead to very unclear positions down the road, where practically it's still much easier to play as white. Tal wasn't a hypnotist. He just attacked, and he attacked relentlessly enough that he constantly and consistently put his opponent in difficult positions where anyone would be hard-pressed to find a good defensive move. And as the game turned out, Black screwed up immediately. Black here needs to find knight e5 with a couple of in-between moves here. On knight xf8, Black needs to see knight c4 to avoid being at a disadvantage and to keep his advantage alive. So to say that Tal was an unsound player misses the entire point of the benefits of playing with the initiative and playing with the attack. The benefit of playing the initiative and attack is it's just much easier to attack and much harder to defend. And Tal was an absolute genius at taking advantage of that psychologically. So another beautiful game from Tal. We're going to continue our series next time, so I'll see you then.